Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Did everyone go down and see the exhibit before you came in? All right, so basically we're going to step into the time machine and go back 50 years with Michael and really talk about how this all came about. And I guess our first questions would be, how did you get into the music industry? What was your pathway?
Well, it's a convoluted one at least. My earliest memory of sort of being hooked was back to when I was 12 years old. And I went to a family party and I was absolutely transfixed by this drummer. And for some reason, I just never took my eyes off him the whole night. And at the end of the party, he came over to me and he said, "I think you need this." And he handed me a pair of sticks. And that was my introduction to the drums. And that really kind of started it all. I begged my parents to let me have a set of drums, which they refused, of course. And until they discovered that most of the furniture in their house now had thousands of tiny dents in them. And they finally succumbed and allowed me to have a set of drums. So that was what started it. I got into started a rock and roll band in our town of Westport, Connecticut. I think we were the first rock and roll band in our town. And those were really the early days of rock and roll. Up to that point, it had all been kind of the crooners and the jazz was popular. But in the late 50s, that's when it all exploded with Elvis Presley and Bill Haley and the Comets and Little Richard and so on. And that's when all of us young guys got bit by the bug. And so I played the drums through high school and also played in college. And I was in Arizona at college, and on the weekends my band and I would go sometimes to California, and we would cut what we thought were going to be major hit records at a studio there. And we actually sold a couple of them to record companies. And they were enormously unsuccessful. And that was another kind of a moment when I really felt like this was something I wanted to do. But in those days, it was kind of hard to just say, well, I'm going to be in the music business, because I wasn't good enough at the drums to even consider a career as a musician. And I had never taken a business course in college. So I was off to a good start to not be in the music business. In any case, my first real job was with a guy named John Kurland in New York City, and he had a little publicity PR firm, and we had some really interesting artists that we were working for. We had the Bee Gees, we had the Mamas and Papas, we had Glenn Campbell, Herman's Hermits, and we would do publicity for these different bands. And that was pretty exciting. And John and I wanted to get into management and production, so we were looking for a group to manage, and it was kind of the early days of the Beatles and the whole British invasion. And we found this band in Philadelphia called Nas. We signed them, and that was Todd Rundgren was the lead singer and lead guitarist. Actually, he wasn't the lead singer, he was just the guitarist and the songwriter. And we brought them up to New York, and we got them a record deal, and we started making records. And that was really the first record that I ever produced, was Hello, It's Me, the Nas version of it. So we had, I guess the Nas was our main focus other than the PR stuff, until one day John died unexpectedly. He was a young guy, and I came to work and he was, he had died the night before. So the Nas was kind of at the verge of breaking up at that point anyway. It was a typical crazy rock and roll band breakup all the typical reasons. And so I got very lucky with somebody that I was friends with, Myra Friedman, no relation, who was the publicity and PR person with Albert Grossman. And she had been a friend of John Kurland's, and she called me up and said, how would you like to meet Albert Grossman? He's looking for somebody to help him with his firm. That's Albert. And Albert was, he was probably the most interesting guy in the music business in those days. He was the most successful business manager, artist manager. And I went and talked to him, and we got along, and he gave me a job working right alongside him, and I brought Todd with me because Todd was obviously very talented and was writing songs and wanted to be a producer, and I thought he could, be an addition. So I took him with me, and I went to work for Albert. And I mean, Albert was the most mysterious, enigmatic person. The roster that he had assembled when I joined him was, we managed Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, the band, Peter, Paul and Mary, Odetta, Ian and Sylvia, Paul Butterfield Blues Band, James Cotton. I mean, it was really an amazing operation. And there was nobody there. It was just Albert and Myra and a guy who was doing basically contracts and booking, and then me. So I was sort of thrown into this at the age of 24, being way over my head. And it just, yeah, that's me. I call that the proof of hair photo. So
what was your role with Albert Grossman?
Well, I was really, my role was whatever he wanted me to do. I was his assistant, and I was his partner on Todd, and basically it was a time when Albert and Bob Dylan were just becoming estranged from each other, and there was also the time when Janis Cheap Thrills had already come out, and the band was just coming out with Big Pink, and I think Bob's album at the time was Nashville Skyline. So it was that period of time, 1967, 68, and basically it was just Albert was spending more time up in Woodstock where he lived, and as Robbie Robertson said at the band induction to the Hall of Fame, if it hadn't been for Albert Grossman, we'd be known as the Poughkeepsie generation. So he was really the guy who created Woodstock as we know it. I'm not talking about the festival, I mean the whole Woodstock experience, town. And he had a house there and decided to build a whole community of musicians and recording studio and restaurant and all kinds of, move his operation more up there over time. So I found myself in New York spending a lot of time doing the day-to-day managerial functions while Albert was up in Woodstock, although he was in the city as well, but increasingly he was spending more time up there.
Okay, so then where does the photography?
Answer.
Well, no, that's all right. That's all right. So where does the photography come in? Clearly you're working 1969. When did you start photography?
My photography interest began when I was just at that very same time, around 1967, 1968, when I was working with the NAS and doing the publicity stuff. A very good friend of mine by the name of Bruce Lawrence, who I've been friends with in high school, was a very successful fashion photographer in New York. And he had a studio, and it was like the movie Blow Up, it was so intriguing. I would go over to the studio and there'd be these gorgeous models, he'd be taking pictures for Harper's Bazaar and Vogue, and it it was an interesting place to be, and and I started getting interested in photography because of him. I loved being in the dark room, and I loved sort of the printing process, and he mentored me without, I think, any intention of being a mentor or any intention of my trying to learn photography for professional purposes. So it turned out that he was really my inspiration for taking photographs. He taught me how to take a picture. He taught me how to wait for the moment and to be, to fully engage in the whole process of, of it being more of the reportage school of photography than taking snapshots where people are posing for you and smiling and, just the usual photographs. So I think that's probably was unconsciously why I was able to take pictures that were more candid and more relaxed with the artists.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at those, but now let's get to the box. I mean, these pictures were lost for years. How did they resurface for you?
Oh my God. I hadn't even thought about these negatives for 40 years, maybe. I knew I had misplaced these negatives because I had taken a lot of pictures, but I had misplaced the negatives before I had a chance to even print them. So I never saw them until my wife, Donna, was cleaning out boxes in the attic one day, and she came down to my office and said, "You'll never guess what I just found." And we were both, she had heard about these, I guess, knew something about the fact that I had misplaced all these negatives, but we didn't really know what was on them. You couldn't tell. You hold it up to the light, and it's a black and white negative. It's impossible to even see what's on there. So we could tell that they were music pictures, and they were found in a box of old contracts and music business papers. So we had them scanned, and we had them digitized so that we could see what was on them. And that was the beginning of it. It just, that was the beginning of the journey.
What made you decide to go public with them?
I don't think that we ever really made that decision consciously. It was kind of a process of, let's see what these look like. Let's get some of them printed. I mean, they were obviously, we saw the scans and we thought, well, that's a good picture. That's pretty interesting. Where was that taken? Like, oh, I don't know. It was 50 years ago. So, then it started to unfold where we wanted to know more, we wanted to see more, and as we started printing the pictures, people would see them occasionally, and all of a sudden there was kind of this enthusiasm about them, and we thought, wow, this is fun. Let's keep doing this. But I don't think we ever consciously said, well, we're going to go public with it, because there was no intention, I don't think, to do that. Yeah.
One of the things I really love about this exhibit is that instead of it being labels written by curators or whatever, the labels are actually written by you. It's your story.
Yeah.
And talk about that process, and also I think once we're actually going to show some of those photographs, so we'll actually expand on those stories. But how did you go about sort of remembering all of those different moments and writing that up?
Well, some of the pictures, as soon as I saw them, I remembered. It's like one of those instant synapses that you rarely have at 76, but they do occur occasionally. So, I mean, I could remember in general terms pretty much what the pictures were about, where I was at the time, and it's really been a process over the last year and a half of kind of refining those memories. Actually, just having Google has been interesting, because it puts, I can Google the time frame and it'll tell me exactly when that concert was, but or where I was at that time, whether I was living in New York or if I was living in Woodstock. And so over time, the memories became much clearer, and we're still filling in some of the blanks. In fact, this week I had an important memory about one of the pictures that I had remembered him wrongly, or not really thought about how it came to be, and then I discovered it. So, and now we're using the archives here at the Hall of Fame to research some stuff, because we're working on a book that will go along with the photographs, and it basically will be more anecdotal than deep research kind of text, because I think that most of the stories about the music business in the 60s and 70s has pretty well been told, but the actual stories of the photographs, where I was, what I was doing, and what happened, I think people find that interesting when they look at the photographs and they hear the story behind them. I think it gives it a different dimension. So we're working on that.
How many negatives do you think there are in the whole collection?
Right now, I think there's about 2,000. We're hoping to find more, but we don't know that there are any more, and I'm assuming that they're not going to be found if they are. So.
What do you think happened to them if they're not? Did you throw them out?
I didn't know what happened to these. I mean, I moved that box 4 times at different houses and different locations and never found them. So, I don't know, I've got Donna busy up there working on finding more boxes.
You've got another Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay. So you know what, let's go and take a look at some of these